So one of the things I whistleblew about when I worked at Bedford Borough Council was falsification of records. I saw my own line manager do it blatantly, forging signatures. The other team leader would often kind of reference it, that sort of thing. And we get many questions coming in on the channel which basically say, I don't trust my housing officer, but how do I prove it? And the answer is it's very difficult to really prove that sort of thing. I was in a situation where I worked in the council and I saw it with my own eyes, but obviously most homeless people are not in that situation, so they have no real way of getting justice when it seems that a council has basically falsified the records. But I did see this LGSCO decision come through a few weeks involving Houghton Borough Council, and effectively I'll give you a bit of an overview because I looked at it for another issue. There's another interesting thing about the case, which is all about what does it mean to deliberately and unreasonably refuse to cooperate with the personalised housing plan. So that in itself, as I say, was interesting. But basically what happened was there was obviously this individual who complained, basically because the council closed down the application before they should have. And during the course of these inquiries, the council thought, hang on a minute, there's more than this, there's more people affected by this particular kind of policy. And so they asked Houghton Borough Council, give us, all the people who were closed down in this period. And basically it came back and said, I think it was like 9 clients who had been closed down in that way. And so LGSCO starts digging around. And by the way, the LGSCO, the Local Government and Social Care Ombudsman, if you haven't subscribed to their newsletter every week, I would highly recommend it, because it's such a good source of information. It's not just telling you what the law is, but it's also giving you examples of when people have basically got justice for themselves, compensation in some cases, and got the council to improve. So yeah, it's worth doing. If you go lgo.org.uk, and I think it's down the bottom right of the home screen, there's a little thing which basically says, do you want to subscribe to the newsletter? Every Thursday lunchtime you get a bunch of emails in the different kind of sectors, sort of, because it covers education, it covers social care, that sort of thing, as well as housing. But you can basically just kind of go through them, and so there's more to say about that. But anyway, in this case, so Houghton Borough Council provided these documents to the LGSCO, and the LGSCO were like, hold on a minute, these look a little bit dodgy. So if I actually quote from the LGSCO decision, I'll put a link to this case on the description of the video. So it says in paragraph 26, a full review of the documents from the council shows there were several applicants where the council failed to show it followed the correct legislative process, and some other applicants where the documents appeared unreliable. Interesting. Then in paragraph 27, a previous draft decision from the Ombudsman raised concerns about the authenticity of some of the documents provided by the council. This is a very polite way of saying these are fake documents, basically. They have been falsified. I think in this case because they didn't actually exist, and then suddenly when the LGSCO started sniffing around, they suddenly did exist. If we then go down to paragraph 35, it says the council's internal audit, go back a step. What the LGSCO did was, once they smelt a rat, they basically told the council's internal audit team or whatever to go and look into the veracity of these different documents. And so in paragraph 35 we see the council's internal audit has shown that there is no record of the original document in applicant G's case being created prior to the council responding to the Ombudsman. So as I say, the Ombudsman started to sniff around, and the housing officers presumably started to magically make up documents and make out that they'd been written at the time. And then that the letter appears not to have been sent to applicant G. The letter created was neither a warning or a decision and did not follow legislative process. The officer responsible also admitted it was likely they did not send it. So again, what we probably have here is an applicant saying they definitely didn't send me anything, and initially the council's trying to make out that they did. That's what it kind of seems to be in terms of reading between the lines. But when it comes down to it, when the LGSCO kind of put some weight into it and say, look, these documents are fake, the council officer realises that actually maybe they didn't send it out after all. But really, it might seem like a small thing. In this case, I'm not quite sure how much difference it would have made to that person, because obviously the ending of the relief duty in itself isn't necessarily that significant. I think it depends whether they're in priority need and stuff like that as well. So in one sense, the level of injustice, so to speak, wasn't that high, but it stinks. And it's interesting that when I talk to different people working in the sector, I had a conversation like this a couple of weeks ago actually, because I was explaining my experience working in the sector in general, charities and local authorities, and the person I was speaking to basically said, yeah, I've worked in a local authority for 10 years, and I'd gone into detail about what it was I blew the whistle about, so gatekeeping, boasting about gatekeeping, that sort of thing, discrimination, all that sort of thing, data breaches, but also this thing about falsifying documents. And I can't remember the exact words he said, but he basically said, yeah, I relate to all of those different experiences. So what he seemed to be saying to me was that he recognised, the data breaches, gatekeeping and falsification of records within his experience. So It does, in my opinion, it does seem likely that these kind of instances are fairly common, but the chances of actually catching a local authority doing it is quite rare. Certainly I've had a little bit of success with it in my own work. John and Katie at Just Us have also kind of raised complaints where, for example, the PHP didn't exist and then suddenly it did exist, and kind of pushed that really. But yeah, I mean, sadly it's kind of often very unsatisfactory what the council then does. I certainly had a case once where it basically mattered what date the homeless application section 184 decision letter was dated, and it was dated on a particular day, and the council was saying, like, we did this decision on this day. But then when I looked at the envelope of the letter it came in, the internal post in the council showed that it had not been delivered for another week, and actually that made the difference. As I say, I think it was probably about where the time limit on asking for a review. And so basically I was able to show they're actually although they might have written it then, although I think they probably didn't, the internal post shows it wasn't sent out for another week anyway. So I know it's not exactly saying that they falsified that record, but it kind of seems to be a little bit misleading that they didn't just say, yeah, we didn't actually send it out till a week afterwards, because as an aside, the time limit, the 21-day time limit on asking for a review of a negative decision starts the day you receive it, not the date the letter is actually dated, if that makes sense. So yeah, as I say, you kind of see this stuff happen quite a lot, I guess, but it's very difficult to actually pin a council down and catch them red-handed. But that's what we've seen here. So the LGSCO didn't really kind of go into any sort of detail about what happens next. My guess is they don't have the authority to tell the council what to do about that, but clearly there was evidence here that a housing officer, and housing officers in general have a huge amount of power, just remember that, very little accountability. In this case, the housing officer, or at least one housing officer, maybe more, was not being entirely honest with what they were doing. So yeah, I wonder what's happened there in Houghton, whether there have been disciplinary action taken against the housing officers. My own opinion is that if you catch a housing officer being dishonest, if you want a decent service, you just need to have a zero tolerance approach on that sort of thing. Particularly when we've got statutory letters going out here which appear to have been falsified, I'd be saying, you need to basically be getting rid of staff that and just not tolerate that sort of thing in the culture, because if there's a little bit of dishonesty that you catch, the chances are there's a huge amount more dishonesty going on that you don't catch. And if you want a decent service that kind of wins the respect and trust of your constituents and your kind of citizens or whatever, you need to make sure your staff are held to very high standards. So yeah, do have a look at the decision. As I say, it's an interesting one. As I say, if you haven't subscribed to the newsletter yet, I'd highly recommend it. And also, if you find this stuff interesting, do check out the online training we do. There's a couple of dates coming up, so I'm recording this in May 2025. There's 2 in the calendar at the moment. Generally speaking, I like to keep 2 open so that if you can't do one, you might be able to do the next one. They're roughly every month. So there's a break in August, but yeah, there's one in June, July, and then I'll put one in September as well. But yeah, do check it out because it gives you the fundamentals of how housing law works. Whilst I can do some very detailed videos on particular issues here and there, it's just good to have that basis which the introductory course gives you in terms of explaining how a homeless application is actually triggered, what it actually is, what gatekeeping is, and giving you that kind of foundation of what's the 5-part test, when should councils make decisions, when can you challenge them. Then you can kind of put this more detailed stuff and kind of fit them into that skeleton. So yeah, and also if you've got questions about it, as always, stick them in the comments. I'll take it to the next live stream, which is 7:30 every Thursday, or most Thursdays. If it's not Thursday, it'll be a Wednesday. I try and notify people in advance. They're recorded, so you don't have to watch them live. If you just go back to last week's recording and have a look through the description, I put the questions that were asked in order, so you can then figure out when it was your question was asked. You don't have to watch the whole thing.